Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and today I want to talk about why relationships aren't easy. You know, we have all this information in front of us about how to be in relationships, what works, what doesn't work, and still after processing all of that at your disposal, you still have trouble making a relationship work. Well, you know, we're going to talk about some of those differences and what the disconnect is. This show is obviously about relationships, and it's in that process of being in relationship with someone that you discover yourself, you discover things about other people, because there are so many intangibles. There are things that you can't learn, you can't know about somebody until you've actually spent time with them. And it's in that minutia, it's in the fine details is where the relationship tends to take off and have its own entity, becomes its own personality. And those are the things that will make a relationship not be easy. You come front-loaded with all your own perceptions about what relationships are. I mean, you think about the companionship, you think about all the fun, you think about all the nice things that relationships can provide for you. It's sold to you in pictures and romance, and there's everything about how to make yourself more attractive, how to make how to smell good, and everything's all relating to those parts of us as individuals. And you think when you come with all of that, you see somebody else with all of that, and you think, oh, it should just come together. It should just work. Well, it doesn't, simply because we're human beings. And because human beings have so many choices about what they like, what they don't like, even things that they don't even know about themselves that reveal themselves when they're in an experience, and there's just differences. And because of those differences, that's what makes it not easy. Now, this show is about relationships and about how to break down the miscommunication aspect of that. Well, it certainly is a challenge to each and every individual about their own limitations, and then finding somebody else that has their limitations and then bridging those connections. So, why aren't they easy? For everything I just mentioned. When you come to another person and say, I want to be open and I want to be vulnerable, that other person has to want to do the same thing. Now, they may not do it on the same level as you. So now we have just a bit of a stilted relationship, and that just means somebody probably has a little more vulnerability than the other. But, you know, this sort of thing sort of does a silly spring back and forth until you get to a level where both people are trying to achieve the same thing. And be it a long-term relationship, be it just to go to the movies, making plans, whatever that is. But in negotiating these things, and the negotiation part of any relationship can be very difficult. It depends on where you come from. Some people, negotiating is just a way of life. They do it. It's no big deal. Other people, they're not used to that. And it can be a very frightening thing. So that person doesn't necessarily have all of the gumption to want to speak up and represent themselves. And they kind of want you to read their mind. Well, you know, I tell you, in relationships, reading somebody's mind is not a very easy thing to do. And the old saying, closed mouth doesn't get fed. You have to speak up. You have to learn that. And relationships are a good opportunity for this. Well, again, this is why they aren't easy. Because there are all sorts of challenges, and a lot of them are put there because we ourselves as individuals have much to learn about ourselves and about how to operate with other people. And when we've been with the same individuals that we've been with all the time, there's sort of a default mechanism that kicks in. You just learn how to be with things. Sometimes you know when to just not speak, and just because you want to just get through something. But when you're with a person by choice, say you're picking a significant other, you kind of have to operate a few other things as well. you have to operate on that compassion. You have to sometimes be assertive. You have to know when not to be assertive. And when you mix all of these things in, when you do it, quote unquote, at the wrong time, well, you're going to get some blowback, some feedback on that might not be so positive. It might make you feel bad on the inside. You may have to do damage control. And damage control by me, make apologies, realize that you did something that you shouldn't have done, and work out those negotiations. Well, see, already you can imagine the disconnect that happens. And when you compare that to things that you perceive that are going on with other people, how well they get along, how well they're able to communicate, and it sort of can be a little disconcerting because you're looking at your situation wondering, how come ours doesn't work that well? Well, maybe they've had a lot more practice at it. And it does take practice. I don't care with who you're in a relationship with. It takes practice. A lot of the things that I talk about are being able to be open and be honest, be vulnerable. And it's in that experience where you learn who you can do that with. Because you kind of have to take a risk. You stick it out there, meaning you take the risk, you talk, you say what you feel, you learn how to communicate, and then you see what kind of response you get. And if the response is works for you, then you realize being vulnerable with that person is okay. If the response you get doesn't work, meaning I'm saying it's in a toxic way, and that way is it be demeaning and not respectful of you. When you get that kind of response, then that's not a safe relationship to be in. So move on. Pick something else. Or if you're going to try to work it out with that person, you got to create some measurable results so that you're moving forward. And sometimes it can be at a snail's crawl, but at least you're moving forward. That's what you want. You want to learn how to do that, and you learn how to reciprocate. These are some of the things that happens so often where you try these things, and sometimes you don't give enough opportunity for them to work out. Because we can certainly become afraid that we're repeating mistakes of the past. But I'm suggesting that if you're trying to operate at this level, when you're trying something different with a new person, give it an opportunity to work. Oftentimes, people don't realize that they are part of the roadblock. They're part of the stalemate of this not operating. And then they have to see that and then make it work. If you're a person who is afraid of all of this, then you have to learn that you're going to have a limited amount of satisfaction in the relationships that you have. And with that, then the person or the partner that you're trying to work with, they may decide that this isn't something for them. They may want to be with someone else. People have experiences, and when they have good experiences, they want to repeat them. If they have experiences with other people, they're coming into a new relationship with you, they obviously want to repeat their good experiences. For example, if they go to the theater, or they like to take drives, or they go hiking, whatever those things are, be willing to do that, be willing to be open, take on that with them, and then also have the same sort of expectation so that you're both trying to get something out of it. If you're a person who's a homebody and you're with a person who likes to be out a lot, well, then there's going to be a disconnect. And if you're a long-term relationship and you have that, well, you probably have worked out some sort of agreement that that this is what's going to happen. The person who likes to go out is probably going to find friends that they can go out and go hiking with, and that's a dynamic of the relationship that hopefully has been discussed and worked out, and it's not something that's just sitting there on the shelf being unspoken. Because those unspoken things tend to be those big things that get swept under the rug, and you finally start tripping over it. And after years, you have an aha moment. But for that, it's all about communication. It's about thinking, considering what it is you want, and being able to verbalize that. And when you've done that, then sharing that with your partner, waiting for an opportunity, waiting for the feedback. And it's okay to revisit that from time to time. And I think that's an important thing to be able to do. Because we all have to learn from our mistakes. And in a great relationship, we do that. I say, if you're not making mistakes, then you're not trying hard enough to learn. It's just that part about life. So, on this, that's why relationships aren't easy. And we'll be right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back. I am John Johnson, your host of Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. Something that comes up, and this is real practical, is you run into an old date, somebody that you had dated a while ago. You're in a new relationship, let's say. And what do you do when you have that encounter? This is one of those etiquette things that I think I visit those types of things from time to time. That is etiquette things, etiquette rules. And if you are in a new relationship and you meet an ex, I think the first thing you do is, if there's that recognition, it's not just that you're in the building, you happen to walk past them. You don't have to make a big overture about running into them, but if it's somebody that it just didn't work out, I think it's okay to acknowledge them. And if you're in a new relationship, you might exchange pleasantries. Hi, how are you doing? And hope things are well with you. And then you go your separate directions. That's great. If you happen to have a conversation that's a little more involved, hey, you might have kids or something like that. It's really important to establish the fact that you are in a new relationship. That way, it gives respect to who you're with, and it puts it out there that you are not trolling for a reconnection with this person. Because again, what we're doing is we're talking about that you've established that you have moved on and you're not trying to reconnect. Because the thing that happens oftentimes in these chance meetings, these encounters, is there could be some reminiscing that goes on and a desire of, because you felt good when the relationship worked, of rekindling something. And when you're in a new relationship, revisiting those feelings isn't really an appropriate thing to do. It's something that we may yearn to do because, we might be in a real vulnerable spot. The relationship itself with the person that you're having to re-encounter with may have been good for a lot of reasons, but you have to acknowledge the fact that it broke up for whatever reason it did. And as in one of my other podcasts, I talk about the halo effect. So let's hope that that's not in effect here. And what the halo effect is that you tend to put this impression on everything you think about a person as having been great and grand. Well, you have to remember the relationship broke up for some reason. And if you're not present to that feeling at the moment you're having that conversation with someone, then you might be deluding yourself as to what really went on. But that's only talking about it from the standpoint of somebody reconnecting and making more out of it than just a hi and a bye. Again, I want you to recognize that you are in a relationship, so acknowledging that to the person that you happen to have this chance encounter with is important. It's not really necessary to establish where you live or if you're happy or all of that. I mean, certainly you're happy. Yeah, tell them you're in great shape, but it's not a place where you're going to be discussing your problems, and certainly not with the chance encounter that you're going to be rehashing the relationship issues there, because that's just out of bounds. We're not there for that. But as an etiquette thing, realize that the world is a small place, and you could easily run into somebody who you dated at some time ago anywhere on the planet. And those chance encounters are what they are. not make anything of them more than they happen to be. Be polite, be cordial, be respectful of your place in life. If you're in a relationship, acknowledge that you have that and that there's boundaries there. And if you happen to not be in that status, if you are single, newly or maybe not newly out of a relationship, but working on yourself, working on some of your issues, then remember that you are in that place. Something to consider is this is just where you can have, this is one of those empathy tools. And I like to borrow this. It's if your significant other were in the room and saw this encounter, what would they think? Would it be an embarrassing gotcha kind of moment if you were there? Or would, if they heard the conversation, would they feel respected and feel appreciated? That's one of those litmus tests that I would use in those sort of encounters. Just a thought. Something else that's a thought here is when you're in a relationship with someone, it's what do you keep for yourself? One of the things about intimacy is that you break down the barriers and you share yourself with that other person. That's how intimacy grows. That's how a relationship grows. Now, what I'm talking about is what do you keep for yourself? Something like a diary. The idea behind a diary, let's say it's a book. It's something that you write in, your thoughts, your feelings. It's got a cover, a top and a bottom. It's closed. In order for someone to see that, they would literally have to open that. For you to share that with someone, and it's your diary, that would be something that is of your choice. It's what belongs in that diary and what may not. Now, if you're the person who has created those memories, or it's part of those memories, let's say with an old relationship, and it's how much of that stuff do you reveal to the new person? The thought that I have is if it doesn't impact the new relationship, there's not necessarily a case for discussing it. If it impacts the new relationship, then it's something that they need to hear about. And they can decide for themselves. You can come to an understanding about it. And these things could pop up at any time. In the beginning, people are sharing their lives, they're sharing information about their lives, their past. And some of these conversations are make or break conversations. There are things that you need to talk about. If you have had a sexually transmitted disease that could affect your partner from this point going forward, then that's information they need to have. I believe if you have a terminal illness or a potential illness, something that's very great, then that is something that your potential partner needs to know, because they can decide if they want to, how they can be in that relationship, what they can bring to it, and if that's right for them. Those are the kinds of things that you discuss up front. The kinds of things that might be left out of the conversation are, like I say, past relationships and all the troubles and things that you've dealt with an ex. Because also there could be some of the good things that you had with an ex. You don't necessarily need to bring all of that stuff forward, because in a new relationship, you are of that experience, but you don't necessarily have to bring all of that conversation into your new relationship because you're looking to build something new. Sometimes talking about all of that old stuff, it could bring up conflicts. And I'm going to use the word jealousy. Jealousy obviously is, has some ugliness to it. But in terms of the feeling, it may make a person feel very uncomfortable. And I'll be the first to say it here. If you're talking a lot about your ex, you're probably not over them. And then you're not ready to start with somebody else. So have that as part of your food for thought. But moving on. We don't need to talk about old sexual encounters, because that is something it's between the pages of that diary. You leave it there. And I certainly don't say that you have to share all of that with someone else. Your past is your past, and there are certainly things that should stay in your past. Moving forward, you're trying to create a new life with someone, and feel free to do so. Embrace that. Move forward. Have new experiences. Be a new person. Those are the good things to want to have with a new person, and you feel fortunate to be able to do that. I also think is that when it comes to mind for you, it's something to share with your significant other or your new significant other, that we each have a past, and there are certain things that aren't material to bring up, to discuss, and we can leave it there and feel safe that it's not that we're hiding something, but that we're being adults, we're being grown-ups. We've had lives before we met each other, and it's okay that we go forward. Now, the young people who are having the experience of meeting someone, and they may have been you may have traveled a smaller circle of people. Young people, you got to understand that this is an adult concept, and it's great for you to take this on as well, because oftentimes young people experience jealousy quite easily, as do older people. But the thing is, jealousy obviously comes from insecurity. Or if you don't know that, then let me share that. Jealousy comes from insecurity, and that's not very attractive. When you expose yourself to someone and then they show jealous tendencies, it makes the whole situation awkward. And trying to untangle some of these feelings, these emotions, can be very challenging, because you have the jealous person operating, and then you have the person that's trying to understand that they've just exposed themselves, they've just shared something very vulnerable, having to defend it. That's a very uncomfortable position. And what I can say is oftentimes people are going to retreat to their corners, and this is not going to get worked out very well. So that's for all of my listeners, the thing about jealousy. But in particular, younger people tend to experience something like that very often, very quickly. They don't have the life's experience to process some of these things. So their relationships tend to move very quickly, and they transition partners very quickly. That's part of youth. That's part of childhood. And I want you to think about where you're at, what you're doing, and also that you do have a past. There are appropriate people to share your past with. If you're dealing with personal issues, there's counselors, there's your parent, there's your pastors and your ministers, things like that. But you don't have to tell that to all of your social circle, okay? So that's part of the knowledge I wanted to impart upon you there. And we are now going to take a small break, and we'll be right back after this.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
And we're back. Here's the thought. You've been out of someone's life for a while, or they've been out of your life. The thought of reconnecting with someone sometimes is very scary. There are a lot of motivations for doing this. Sometimes there's the possibility of there being a death or an impending death. Somebody may be sick and they want to share this information. They want to reach out to you. You may feel bad about something that has happened in terms of a breakdown in communication. There could have been a really bad argument. And, there could be things such as people have just lost contact information, and then you find it again. Could have been in an old cell phone, or it could have been a letter that gotten stuffed away somewhere and you lost it. Well, reconnecting with someone out of your past. I talked a little bit in the earlier part of this podcast about what it's like to run into chance encounters, but I'm talking about something that is a little more deliberate. And it's, if you've had that experience of this, an argument, and you said, okay, I'm going to never talk to you again, and I'm thining of a situation, if it's a family, and there's been some ugliness that's happened, and yelling and shouting, and there's been a history of this, how do we reconnect? How do we start the process of saying, I want to talk about this. I've got information to share. I think the thing to consider is, why do you want to be in communication in the first place? Now, there's two people. There's the person that's trying to start the communication, and there's the person who's going to be on the other end of that. Number one, you have to be clear in your motive about why you want to talk to a person. If you're wanting to share that so-and-so is really sick and I thought you should know, be clear about that and share that information. And what I want to single out is, you have individuals that come out of the woodwork because they want money, they want some sort of resources. I'm going to suggest that if that's your motive, and you need to be honest with yourself, if that's your motive, you need to speak to that and say that's your motive. Expect that you're going to get rejected, because people being asked of in that way oftentimes feel like they're being used. If you are the person who just wants to share information about, we have a family member that's sick, or someone has missed you and they really were sorry that things broke down in terms of the communication, I think that's a bit different. Now, you could be asking for someone's compassion, and that may be difficult in light of what may have happened in the past when you have these huge breakdowns in communication. But it's the thought that when you want to talk to somebody and you have been out of communication with them for a long time, and you're going to reopen that, then you really have to be thoughtful about what your motivation is, and you should speak to that very, very quickly, because the listener or the person you're trying to appeal to, trying to build a bridge with, is going to be making their own assessment, their own judgments about what's going on. And maybe they have healed something of themselves about why the split happened. But if they haven't, they're probably going to be very, very, very mistrustful, and you're going to have to bridge that in some way, shape, or form. So to do that, you have to have integrity with your word. You have to speak clearly about what it is you want, and say that early. And clearly be about, hey, look, I'm not here to ask you for money or anything like that, and say, I'm sorry that we had a breakdown in communication. And then wait for a response. They may not want to be in communication with you. They may want to decide for themselves if they feel comfortable with that. And you'll have to learn to be okay with their decision, their response to that. Sometimes it's even better if you write it in a letter, because that way they can take the page out and they can read it at their convenience. Sometimes the experience of being in the presence of someone is overwhelming, and it may not go well for that other person. So I believe that is a way in which you can bridge these communication gaps or hiccups, as I would like to think that they are, and make peace with that. Because I think ultimately we would all like to live in peace. We'd all like to live and feel like we're being loved, and have that perception about that we are trying to be loving. And that's one way in which you can do it. In my next podcast, I'm going to be talking a little bit about what it's like to be a child of divorce, some of the things that happen, some of the experiences, and what to do about it. You've been listening to John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I want to thank you for joining me. Until next time, I hope you're having a great relationship.